Dr. Boesak, how are you doing? Perfect. It's very interesting times that we're actually in at this point in time. And you know, the interesting thing is the ANC is in what we would call unprecedented territory, you know, with the talks of coalitions and, you know, governments of national unity. I just want to know what are your views on these things? What do you think of what's happening now?
Well, it is unprecedented territory indeed, but not only for the ANC, but for the country as a whole. We've never been in a situation like this. This is, I think, very different from 1994. There we had almost a prepared table. You've had so-called negotiations. Before the negotiations, you've had at least 5 years of secret talks between the ANC and the National Party government. So there was a lot of preparation for this. They knew what they were going into. It is not implausible to think that what we thought were negotiations at CODESA were in fact previously agreed agreements. So that was more of a political theater than anything else. But now we are in a situation where everybody is talking about coalitions, which is a political fact right now, and coalitions certainly on the provincial and on the municipal level do not have a good reputation in this country. We haven't really developed the political maturity to work with one another without the aim being to undermine as quickly as possible so that I can get a position that I actually want, even though I don't deserve it, even though my voting block is not large enough to make me want to claim it. And so we have that as a pattern. And that's why coalition governments on those levels did not really work. So it is legitimate to ask, how would it then work on a national level? Because it's basically the same people, unless there is now a much greater realization of the crises that have developed throughout the last 30 years, not just by misrule of the African National Congress, but because policies were based on those agreements which I see as fundamentally flawed, made before 1994, but also because we simply do not know practically how to work that. National government or government of national unity doesn't have that good a reputation either. You will remember that we had that between the ANC, some smaller parties, and the National Party mainly after 1994. That did not last very long. Mr. de Klerk walked out fairly soon into this, and so we can't even say that the 5 or 10 years that they envisaged for this government of national unity to work and for the people to get used to it and for us to get used to one another, that has been a successful experiment that we can fall back on. The other issue, of course, is that that national government of national unity was meant to sort of present a political reality of the image or the semblance of the reconciliation we were talking about. Now, because the reconciliation was not real, the government could not work on a real premise. It was a faulty logic that you tried to build into a political reality that did not work either way. So your expression, uncharted waters, unprecedented situation, is perhaps an underestimation of the real challenges that we are facing right now. And that is why we have not built over the last 30 years. I was going to say that is why we need a different kind of mind thinking politically at this point than what we have had over the last 30 years. But we've had 30 years of an experiment in democracy in which we have not trained our people to think politically differently. We have not grown a generation from young people of onwards to think of politics as the politics of decency and integrity and honesty and courage and virtue. We have taught them the politics of what South Africans now call the politics of the stomach, the politics of greed, the politics of power at any cost. And so the vacuum that we are sitting with is deep, my brother, and it is great and challenging. So you need much more than just the usual way of thinking about politics, and you need much more than the usual politician to get us out of the hole in which we have dug ourselves for 30 years now.
Okay. Now, the other question I have now is that what is the way forward? What do you think would work best for South Africa? Because there's a lot of talk about a DA ANC coalition, and then there's also talk about coalition with other smaller parties, and the option of the government of national unity. Which do you think would work best for South Africa at this point in time?
Well, let me begin with the easiest one. People have heard me speak on this for some time now. I think that a ANC-DA coalition would be a disaster for the country, and it would be a disaster for the African National Congress. It still blows my mind a little bit that people in the African National Congress, whom I know some of them as people who can think, people who deeply care for their organization, that they cannot see the self-inflicted wound that they are walking themselves into and what that would mean for themselves and for the rest of our people. So if you think that there is any common ground between the policies of the DA and the policies that the ANC proclaims it stands for, then you must be totally out of your mind. I can't see that. I can only see that the DA has worked very, very hard to maintain as much of apartheid as it possibly could wherever it ruled, and to undermine a move away from apartheid in other areas where it did not have a direct ruling say or power, but could undermine it. Now, it's true that the ANC almost prostrated itself in front of the DA as far as his policies are concerned. For instance, the ANC's choice for neoliberal capitalism as an economic policy, that's straight of the playbook of the DA. And it was a disastrous policy for our people. That necessitates the high unemployment that we have. That necessitates the social economic inequalities that we have. That necessitates the impossibility to build social cohesion in the way that we do. That necessitates the lack of opportunities that comes through equal education for everybody, and I can go on and on and on. And those are DA intentions, those are DA inclinations. Instinctively, that's where they go. That the ANC thinks that what it has done in following the DA in that was good for the country is impossible even to begin to imagine. So to formalize that into a coalition with the very party that represents the desires and the wishes and the will of the sons and the daughters of the slave owners of my people, I have no words. So that should not even be a thinkable possibility. If you talk about a government of national unity, it sounds better, and so we are called to think a little bit deeper about what does that mean, though? If you have a government of national unity where a party like the DA, because of the inbuilt advantages that white people have had over 320 years, not changed at all fundamentally in the last 30 years, that's why the DA can speak of things like meritocracy, which is code word for a new form of racism. Because if you speak about meritocracy and fit for purpose without historical context and depoliticizing it, then that's pure racism. Because if I, as a black child, and that person as a white child, with the unequal opening to a decent education that we still have today come out at the other end, and we are tested on merit laid down by people who have been advantaged way above what they deserve and way above what I needed to do. What is meritocracy other than? If you look at their list, you can see where that leads us. If you have the DA's most prominent black leaders resign one after the other because they can no longer sit in that fog of racism that the DA tries to keep under the surface but pops out every time it matters. So those are the issues that we need to keep in mind. If that party is part of a government of national unity, then I don't see how an ANC with its absolutely weak leadership at this particular point in time can even begin to think that they will be the senior partner. The DA will rule the roost whichever way you throw the dice. Whether it is in committees or whether it is in cabinet positions, it doesn't really matter. That is besides the fact that Mr. Ramaphosa himself is a person under such a dark personal cloud that he himself has been weakened. We know him as a person that does not have real political spine. There is no ethical, moral compass that anchors him. Is more persuaded by what is in his personal interest, financially and economically, than the interest of his people. And so that we know now. Everybody says that. But that cannot be a situation in which a government of national unity is brought together. You cannot build a government of national unity when the supposed values upon which any government must be built, not just policies. Policies is one thing. Policies make only sense when it is built on values that are geared towards the well-being of South Africa's people. And in this case, let's be blunt, the black people, all of our black communities that have been disadvantaged and kept disadvantaged historically and in the present for so long. And so if you do not have agreement on an economic policy that is bent on breaking the cycles of impoverishment our people have been living under, then what is that government going to do? If you do not have a policy that is different from the ANC policy right now. Now, the ANC's national plan built into its 2030 goals already the ongoing reality of social inequalities that will remain a part of South Africa's life. Now, if you have a new liberal capitalist system and a policy that anticipates, that welcomes, that has no plan to change those socio-economic inequalities, that undermines everything else and that can bring revolution to this country if it is not stopped and redirected. If that is not a shared value, what are we talking about? What is a government of national unity going to do? So those are the questions that I am thinking. So you've got to ask, who are those parties that at least proclaim and therefore can be called to account on their accountability, on their commitment to the oppressed majority of South Africa's people? DA has no such commitment, and that's why nobody expects it from the DA. The DA has no such intent. So we can't call them, we can't hold the DA accountable to build an open, non-racial, egalitarian society. You have to look for those political parties that have that. That is the unprecedented precipice on which we stand right now. That we have to be very clear, we have to be very firm on what is really for the well-being of South Africa's oppressed masses. Otherwise, it is not going to work.
Yeah. Well, what about let's say a combination with the other different parties? Let's say, for example, the ANC forming a coalition with the MK or EFF or the IFP, for example.
which combination do you think would work best? Would it work best if, you know, they pick one out of the various other parties, or would it work better if they all come together?
It is probably better if they have as broad a participation as possible from those parties that I have just described, that you can call to account on the fundamental issues and values that I have just spelled out. If that is an agreement, then the broader you make it, the better people will feel that their participation in these elections have not been for nothing. We must guard against exclusion, but we must also guard against improper inclusions. And so I would not be pushed, if I were those parties, I would not be pushed too hard on getting this thing done within the next week. I would say to the country, this is a very new, difficult situation. Let's give ourselves the time. And let's work hard. Politicians must not be afraid to get up early in the morning and go to bed late at night. We did that all the time during the struggle. And everything we do right now has to be to regain all of those things and ideals and principles and fundamentals that we fought for and that so many people died for. If you haven't been part of that struggle, it really makes no sense for you to be part of what is going on going forward into this new situation. And so I would sit down and I would say, let's agree on the fundamentals. Let's agree on principles and policies based on these fundamentals. Let's agree on how we take responsibility for that. And at every turn, let us make sure that our people know what is going on and how far we are, so that the public, the South African people, cannot be excluded. We were excluded in those secret talks between 1985 and 1989. And in a very real sense, we were excluded in CODESA because it was mostly political theater. Now, with 30 years behind us and all of the disillusionments and the disappointments and the anger and the expectations that were not realized but were righteous expectations, fully understandable expectations. With all of that now almost like boiling pot under the surface, I would make sure that I take the South African people in my confidence every step of the way to make sure that what we build this time will be different.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. Now, the other question that comes up is that it seems like these other political parties that have shown some kind of interest in forming a coalition with the ANC have certain demands. You know, like for example, the MK party said they would go into coalition talks since Ramaphosa, and the EFF, for example, has said that going to coalition talks on condition that, you know, their deputy president becomes the heads up treasury and things like that. Now the question is, because these guys are making these kind of demands, it seems they might have some kind of leverage over, you know, over the ANC. Would you know anything about that? You know, what kind of leverage they might have over the ANC, or maybe it's
there is leverage and leverage. Let me first say, I mean, I'm not a negotiator in that sense, but I would not make those demands public too soon. I would rather say, let's put the principles and the values up front. If the president does not, in his character, in his track record, in his intentions, correspond with those values and those publicly proclaimed fundamentals that we now see, it's not the person that's non-negotiable, it's the principle that's non-negotiable. And so you test not whom the ANC chose in 2017 by hook or by crook, mostly by crook. Where was I here? So, but that's the ANC's problem, which they now have made the nation's problem, which must not be the case. But I would insist publicly, clearly, on foundational values that I would say this is what our people want. Now, if your track record shows you're not part of that No. So what are you saying to me? So that's number one. Number two, I would think that if anybody has leverage over somebody else, it seems to me to be the DA that has a lot of leverage over the African National Congress. And because they have that leverage over the ANC's president, which is now our country's president, the Pala Pala matter comes to mind, the Marikana matter, which is not solved at all, and which nobody seems to want to talk about. I worry about Marikana. I worry about 34 black miners killed in a few minutes. I worry about emails sent by the president giving instructions to treat them as if they were just criminals that deserve nothing else but the bullet. I would worry about things like that, and I would say I need to hear a different accounting of that situation. In Pala Pala, we now know from the mouth of the DA itself that they had written to the American Federal Bureau of Investigation to investigate this matter, because this was a thing that was done in American dollars. And so, did it contravene any law in the United States? Did it contravene any law in South Africa? And so they followed up the letter to the FBI with a letter to the FIC and with a letter to the SARS, which they have declared openly, and which they have said, we want answers to these questions. Now, what answers they were given, we do not know, except that from SARS, Mr. Kieswetter did say that there was a declaration from the side of the president, he is compliant. Now, I don't know how monies that can be smuggled into the country, sort of and hidden away, stolen, and only when it was stolen, it came to light how that could be compliance, but maybe that's a definition I don't understand. I'm just a pastor. How do I know these things? So those are the issues that can be raised anytime. And if I had that kind of leverage, like the DA would have, I would say to the president, unless you do what I say, we will raise these issues. Unless you do what I say, I will not block a vote in Parliament of no confidence against you when these matters arise again. And so it seems to me that whichever way we turn the lens, it seems to focus every single time on Mr. Ramaphosa. And because he is, from every point of view, from a legal point of view, from a political liability point of view, from an ethical moral point of view, he seems to me to be a too easy target. A person with a sword of Damocles hanging over its head, and if the DA has that sword, it doesn't matter in what position the DA is, it can threaten him with that sword. That's how the political reality works. Now, I don't know what they are discussing amongst each other. I don't know what promises they are making to each other. All I know is if you have a person as the president of the country with that cloud hanging over you, then you are vulnerable to all sorts of things. And every single thing that you are vulnerable is bad for our people. And that is the measurement. What is good for our people? What serves the well-being of people? What can bring justice to our people? What can turn the situation around? Not just stop the misery in general, but stop the specific policies that are the cause of the ongoing misery of our people. South Africa should not be in the position we are today. We should not be. From every point of view, we should not be. Not from an economic point of view. We have the wealth in this country, but we have policies that make of the treasures of our nation and state-owned enterprises as if we are dragging them day by day to the auction block. How can you have a minister responsible for SOCs who sounds like an auctioneer? And 1, 2, 3, what do you say? Going once, going twice, going third, gone? Like SAA, going one, going twice, gone? I mean, you can't have that. And if you take away the treasures of the nation, and you sell them to a few to enrich those few who are already wealthy, and you take them away from our people, you jeopardize and you steal the very future and the very hope of our youth and of our children. Now, and those are, I would put those issues on the table if we talk negotiations now. And I would not assume anything on the basis of what we've seen before 1994 and after 1994.
Okay, from what you've just said, I pick it up that it seems that the ANC's president, which is the national president, is quite a weak link when it comes to the ruling party. Now, but the bigger question now becomes, how does that then affect the ordinary citizen like me when it comes to the ruling party and this coalition government making decisions? How would it have? What's the effect of it?
Well, it affects everything, my brother. I mean, one has to take a careful look at both the constitutional powers given to the presidency in this country and the powers that this president has gathered to himself contrary to the Constitution. For instance, bringing state security, national security into the presidency is not constitutional. But he's done that. And so you have to ask the question why. So it affects people at every single level. The image that the president projects to the wider world affects us because it affects what they used to talk about foreign investment and what kind of a country it has. It affects every single policy. I mean, if you look at everything that the president first has to sign off on before it can become law and before it becomes reality, then it means that everything in the lives of our people is affected. And so the necessity to have a principled person, a fundamentally moral person. I'm not talking about a perfect person. We're not talking perfect here. If we preach to perfect people, as a preacher, I wouldn't have a job. And so that's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about having an open eye for the imperfections, the unnecessary imperfections of our society that opens ourselves up to inflicting injustices upon our most vulnerable people in our population. So it seems to me that's very important. I mean, I would not entrust the presidency to somebody from the DA who has proved to be the most effective and successful new colonialist project on the continent. I would not entrust that responsibility to a person that brings us from apartheid into a new form of apartheid. There's a young white man who wrote and said, for white people, the post-apartheid situation is perfect because it is apartheid without the guilt. That has to go. That has to end right now. You cannot have a person that does not care about the fact that the township child is doomed to a township school and is doomed to a township future, so to speak, because they cannot compete with anybody else, not in this country and not abroad. 30% for your grade 12 entry into university is a condemnation of the future of every child. On that basic level is what we have to think of now. And I know it's a lot, but it's, in a sense, it's our own fault because we sat here for 30 years, we let it happen. We can't let it happen again. And so upon those people in political parties who went around talking to our people, asking them to vote, making them promises on their shoulders is where this race is right now.
Okay, just one final question. Right now, can you maybe say it in a simpler terms so that some of ordinary people like myself can understand what exactly are the ANC's options and which of the government's options would be best for the country?
the ANC will probably know what those options are, and they may be discussing that in the upcoming NEC meeting. The option to go into a coalition with the DA seems to me to be already so objectionable to the broad masses in our country that they would be wise to step away from it. The option to form a government of national unity in which the DA is a favored or a best advantaged partner is a serious difficulty for the country. It would not serve the well-being of our people. A government which will include those parties that can be united around these issues that I have tried to highlight during our conversation seems to me to be the best. It can be defended. I suppose there will be sections of the South African population that call themselves the left who would say, no, 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 none of these are good enough. That is true. But my most important consideration is I have met with people over the last almost a year that I've been trekking across the country speaking about these things. And they are saying to me, we cannot live under these conditions for one day longer. We cannot live with children dying of hunger in our country for one day longer. We cannot live with kids having an education that is no education, or preparing them for this future that we are living with at all. So those are simple, clear things. And if the ANC with its 40% can go into partnership with political parties, but the ANC will have to say to itself, what is it that we used to be? What is it that we promised our people in '94? And I know, and lots of people know, because I campaigned with Nelson Mandela across this country in 1994. I know what we promised the people. So the ANC will have to ask itself, can we reclaim what we are supposed to be? And on that basis, not on what we have become through greed and incompetence and sellouts throughout the 30 years, but what is it that we claim to be? What is it that our history compels us to be? What is it that the sacrifices of our people compel us to be? Bring that to the negotiating table. If they can do that, then they can say, let us begin to build. I'm not saying this will be a perfect government. I can say this may be something that we can start all over again, because we have to start all over again. And so we have to break down as we are called to build up. And one of the things that we have to rediscover is, where is that ANC that people loved and believed in and trusted in 1994? And can that ANC emerge? And can that ANC sit down with like-minded political parties, or parties that say they proclaim the same thing, and build?
All right, Dr. Boesak, we thank you for this interview and for all the insight that you just provided.
Thank you.
Thank you.